My name's Timothy. I'm a field technician here at Jamf. Working with Jamf for about 8 months, and before that I was on your end of the situation. I was a Jamf Pro customer, using Jamf Pro to manage the macOS machines used by our digital media teams.
My name is Dan Snelson. I am a Mac and mobile engineer with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We are frequently called Mormons because of our belief in a volume of companion scripture to the Holy Bible called the Book of Mormon. We manage about 3,000 devices with Jamf products.
So, to get started, here's our agenda. I'm going to start by, taking a look at extension attributes and how we create them. We'll move on to taking a look at how we can use our extension attribute values as criteria in our smart groups or advanced searches. We'll move on to some common examples, some templates, and then we're going to round out the session with some EAs that Dan's created in his environment. And that abbreviation doesn't roll off the tongue super well, but roll with us. And then, as Lene has said, and as every session in this room has gone for the past 2 days, we'll have hopefully plenty of questions and answer time at the end. So, again, how-to session. We don't want to leave anybody behind. We're going to start with the basics. And on that note, for the uninitiated, what are extension attributes? At their core, they're a way for you to, how do I say this? Je ne sais quoi. Track additional information in your device inventory record, something custom that you care about. Shortly after I started with Jamf, another field tech, Chris Chassis, was working on something to do with extension attributes. He asked me if I was familiar with them. Coming from a hybrid Windows and Mac environment, I immediately assumed Microsoft Active Directory extension attributes, and I said, yeah, man, I know what you're talking about. It didn't take long to figure out that we were not talking about the same thing. And that joke is corny, but I tell it because fundamentally they're actually pretty similar. The same way that having those additional fields in your AD records, using extension attributes in Jamf Pro can really be helpful in a lot of the same ways. So, if we're going to start, if we're going to make our first extension attribute, what are our options? We can make an EA for a user, a mobile device, or a computer. Our data types can be a string, an integer, or a date. There's your format, and you can use it without the time as well if you just need the date. And then our input types, we've got in the third column here, but there are kind of a few things to keep in mind there. A pop-up menu or a text field extension attribute can be used for any type of extension attribute, whether that's user, mobile device, or computer. We've got the option to pull an LDAP attribute of the assigned user for mobile device or computer extension attributes, and then for our exclusively for our computer extension attributes, we can have a scripted value in there, which Dan's going to talk a little bit more about.
One of my favorite features of Jamf Pro is computer extension attributes, especially scripts. The input type of script allows you to run custom code and have the results populate the Jamf Pro database each time a computer submits inventory. When an extension attribute is populated by a script, the text between the results tag is stored in the Jamf Pro server. For macOS computers, scripts can be written in any language that an interpreter is installed. And the most common interpreters are Bash, Perl, and Python. All scripts must begin with a shebang and followed by the absolute path to the interpreter. For example, the script for an extension attribute that collects the host name of a computer, this is what it looks like. You start with the shebang, you echo the open results tag, followed by the hostname command. Then you redirect 2 standard error to 1 standard out, and you close with a results tag. So beginning with the next time the computer submits inventory, you'll have the hostname for all your enrolled Macs. So now that we've talked about what extension attributes are, Timothy is going to show you what it's like to set up some extension attributes and how you can start taking advantage of them in your environment.
Is this my slide? There we go. So Extension attributes are really super versatile. We can do a lot of things with them, but in general, we're almost always talking about, kind of like Dan and I have said, and like we'll say throughout the session, we're talking about tracking some kind of custom inventory information. You could very well think of a counterexample, but for the most part, that's what we're going to see in our examples today. The graduation year example that we'll look at tracks information about the user assigned to a device. The repair status, I'm losing my balance on this stage. The repair status helps you keep track of information about your device that you couldn't actually get, or you couldn't normally get from some configuration file or a plist or whatever. And even the High Sierra compatibility check that we'll look in a little bit, it kind of falls into the same idea, where we're taking all of these different pieces of data from your computer, putting those all together through the script and giving you this one end result or this one piece of information. And in this case, is my computer compatible with High Sierra, yes or no? The kind of thing that you couldn't naturally just get from a device. So jumping into our first example, like I said, we're going to take a look at graduation year. Pretty common example with a lot of our education customers. Taking a closer look, we can see what we need when we're creating our first extension attribute. We give it a name. We've got the option to give it a description, the data type, the category of where we want to see it in our inventory, and the input type. Here you can see, hopefully you can see, I sat way back there earlier and I realized you can't totally see this from super far away, but here we've chosen to display this in our general tab. We're looking at an integer and we're going to enter that via a text field. So here we're looking at our device's inventory record. Hopefully, again, you can see we've got our general payload there selected, so we've got it in the inventory tab we want it to be in. And in this scenario, we've assigned the device a graduation year of 2019, indicating it's been assigned to a high school or college junior. To assign data to that field, you'd simply edit your inventory record, hit the edit button at the top of the page, or the edit general button if you're still working in version 9, and enter it in the text field. Next up, we have created our first smart group. And we've set our kind of sole criterion there so that any device with a graduation year of 2021 or sooner is going to fall into this group. You could certainly go a step further than this and say, high school juniors or class of 2019, class of 2020, whatever, if you wanted or needed more specific group membership. The main benefit here in this scenario is if you are an education system, then you simply go and you update your criteria and your smart groups or your searches instead of going to every junior device and changing a field from junior to senior and repeating that process ad nauseum for every grade and every device. Oh, I should have zoomed in earlier. So, and now we've got a configuration profile with restrictions for our high school students, at least based on the name. And we're targeting the smart group that we created in our scope, the group from the previous slide right here in our scope. For our next example on the docket, we'll take a look at keeping track of a device's repair status. Hopefully, again, we can see that we've chosen a string in our hardware tab to be entered via pop-up menu, again, compared to the integer general text field that we looked at before. And virtually every organization can relate in some way to broken or damaged devices, but you can also see that we've got a few options beyond broken yes or no. You might be the kind of shop that it's easier or more cost-effective to send out a whole batch of busted devices all at once instead of a separate box for every iPad with a cracked screen. So we've got the broken to be repaired and the out for repair options, for kind of those different periods. In a different situation, you might not have many or even any spare devices on hand. So if somebody says, I busted my iPad, you have to kind of evaluate the extent of that damage. Maybe leave an iPad with just a cracked screen out in the field and get that taken care of later. But again, that's kind of the purpose of the cosmetic damage functional device that the option that we've got here. So like before, we can see our extension attribute in the tab we chose, this time hardware. And again, to change that, edit your inventory, hit the edit button, edit hardware button if we're still working in version 9, and update that pop-up menu. So looking at another smart group, we've got a group here with a few of our options, a few of our EA options as our criteria here. And we've given it the name repair exclusion since we'll be using it as an exclusion in our scope for our content. And this still kind of keeps in line or continues with the options that we saw earlier as the cosmetic damage option, if I'll zoom in properly, is not in this list because if a device just has a cracked screen, then you probably don't actually want to exclude it from the content that you're deploying. So circling back to our high school restrictions, mobile config, now we can see, well, the zoom isn't super helpful, but you can see our repair exclusions group that we just created is now in the exclusion tab. One quick kind of detour side note, we're looking at what is almost the same example of the attribute record, but this time we've created it as a computer extension attribute, which you can see from the breadcrumbs there, which are super rad. When you're using pop-up menu or text field extension attributes, you like ratting? When we're using a pop-up menu or text field extension attributes, you also have the option to populate that value upon enrollment with recon. So if you're the kind of organization that has to do some pretty regular re-enrollment through that, then you can take advantage of having this custom information that you care about and filling it immediately upon enrollment. Obviously, repair status isn't the best example for that, but hopefully you can use this to kind of spur your imagination. One other pretty big thing, I guess, to keep in mind, for an extension attribute like this one, whether it ends up being mobile devices or computers, we've also got the option to save an advanced search with just our broken to be repaired option, I guess, first. As your sole criterion. You run that once a week, and then every Monday or Wednesday or whatever, you've got a report that tells you exactly once you've hit your number of broken devices. So you could say, great, now it's time to ship out a batch. Similarly, you could, kind of as we've got here, you could include your cosmetic damage value so that maybe a week before Thanksgiving or a week before Easter or whatever, you could run this one as well, and you'd know how many or which devices, I guess, should be sent in when the office is slow or when school's out. Did I miss a transition? You're up anyway.
So when you initially deploy a Jamf Pro server, there aren't any extension attributes. There are, however, nearly 200 extension attribute templates included in the Jamf Pro server that you can begin using right away. You can view computer extension attributes by clicking Settings, Computer Management, and then Extension Attributes. This is a screenshot of a fresh Jamf Pro server, so we don't have any extension attributes. We'll click New from Template at the top. We're interested in the battery health of our Mac, so we'll type battery in the filter category, and then we'll click Battery Health Status from the list. All of the information you're seeing here can be changed, but we are interested in having this extension attribute be displayed in the hardware section of our inventory, so we'll change that. And then we'll click Save. Like our previous example, once the device has submitted fresh inventory data, we can now see the extension attribute information in the category we specified, and then use that as a criterion in our smart groups.
So, quick show of hands. How many of you are still using maybe like 2009, 2010 era Mac hardware? Oh, good. Some people are actually raising their hands. I was worried nobody would. So Laurent Patois, he was just on stage. He's still here. Shouts out to Laurent. Laurent wrote this super rad script to use as an extension attribute for your macOS devices to determine whether or not they are whether or not they meet the requirements to have that upgrade to move up to High Sierra. Well, good. We don't need me up there. That's too much. So to kind of get into that, we can see for reference here, we can see the hardware requirements at the top with the models that meet those requirements in the table below. The asterisks are there because 2 gigs of memory and 8.8 gigs of storage are Apple's minimum requirements. Laurent wrote his script with 4 gigs of memory and 15 gigs of storage to give himself a little extra wiggle room. If you're proficient or fluent in Bash, you can kind of modify that window there for yourself, but that's just kind of the only minor difference here. But if we look at our extension attribute record, oh shoot, no. It's hard to use your phone as your notes. Okay.
You're right. Right here, too.
So looking at, I'm going to use this for a second. Looking at our record, once again, we can see our name, our description, our data type, and you can start to see the script towards the bottom. We're not going to dive all the way into this one. If you want to see it in all of its glory, definitely hit up Laurent's GitHub page. But the point here is that hopefully you can see that even a scripted macOS extension attribute really isn't that much more complicated than a pop-up menu or a text field. So again, we can see our extension attribute result in the device inventory record. Again, can be used as a criterion in our smart groups or advanced searches. For full disclosure, you could make yourself a smart group with the 8 or so requirements we saw a couple slides ago. And that would still give you a group to scope to for the 10.13 update, but there are kind of a couple downsides, a few downsides to that approach. First of all, making a smart group with 8 criteria can get kind of unwieldy. Second of all, you wouldn't be able to see the result, or the compatibility result in your device's inventory record. And third, you wouldn't be able to use that in any of your smart group advanced search, is what I meant to say. You wouldn't be able to use that in your advanced search criteria. No more phone. Phone's done. But anyway, as a result, having a scripted macOS extension attribute for this purpose, it's an example of something where having these EAs isn't necessarily something you couldn't accomplish without them, but something where utilizing them really makes your management life a lot easier. So we've seen a handful of scripted macOS EAs at this point, and these play a really big role in our new patch management functionality. And on that note, Dan's going to dive a little bit more into the new and improved patch management that you'll get with Jamf Pro v10 and how our extension attributes tie into that.
By far, my favorite feature in Jamf Pro 10 is patch management, which leverages computer extension attributes. In the highlighted example, we see Adobe Flash, which was created because we added the Adobe Flash Player patch management software title on our Jamf Pro server. Let's see what that process looks like. On a fresh installation of a Jamf Pro server, there won't be any patch management software titles, so we'll click New. We'll click the Add button next to the desired software title, in this case, Adobe Flash Player, and you'll notice that an extension attribute is created and it's displayed in red since it needs our attention. So we'll accept that, and then we'll save the software patch management title. Now, when we view our list of computer extension attributes, we'll see at the bottom patch management software extension attributes. And it's important to note that these cannot be edited and they cannot be deleted. They are, however, removed if you delete the patch management software title. So now, keeping in mind everything that we've seen so far as our foundation, we'll look at a few scripted macOS extension attributes that we use in our environment at the LDS Church. So let's start by looking at an extension attribute to invite your power users to opt in via self-service to be your beta testers. And we'll also show a more complex script that will read the setting of a system preference pane. And we'll finish up with one approach for controlling when extension attributes are executed. So if you're interested in allowing your power users to opt in and opt out via self-service, you can search Jamf Nation for your internal beta test program, opt in and opt out via self-service, or Discussion ID 20762. Let's first talk for a minute about how to use Discussion IDs. If you're on Jamf Nation and you click Discussions, you'll see a list of discussions. If you know the Discussion ID, you can manually edit the URL and you'll view that specific discussion. This also works for feature requests. So if you have somebody who wants you to upvote their feature request, they can just give you the ID number and you can upload that. And then it also works for knowledge base articles. Let's also talk about how to test extension attributes. we strongly recommend that you deploy a development or a stage Jamf Pro server. When you are on Jamf Nation and you view My Assets, you'll see a customer test and development activation code, which you can use for your development or stage lane. And if you're like me and you struggle to keep stage in sync with production, you could enroll humans, for example, your manager. You will then be highly motivated to keep your stage lane in sync with your production lane. So you should test your extension attributes when you're elevated as the root user, because that is how the Jamf binary will execute the attributes, scripts. And I would recommend you do them on VMs. If you can afford physical hardware, that might be even better. And then as a caution, again, please remember that EA scripts run as root. Okay, so this extension attribute came directly from Justin Seiko, who was working as a professional services engineer for the church at the time. We created a pop-up menu called testing level, and it had 3 options: alpha, beta, and gamma. And so here's what that looks like in the Jamf Pro server. The extension attribute's name is testing level. The data type is a string. We're going to display it on the extension attribute section of our inventory record. And the input type is a pop-up menu, and the choices are alpha, beta, and gamma. So alpha is just for my machines that I control, for the VMs and for the physical hardware that I use in my testing. Beta is for all my teammates. And then gamma is for anyone else who has opted in from any other team in the church. To assign a computer to one of these testing levels, you navigate to the computer record, click Extension Attributes, and click Edit. You set the testing level, and then you click Save. Now, this has been working well, but it has required a JSS administrator to manually edit each computer record. And so if you like, you could review Discussion ID 20762, which details how you can leverage the API to let your users opt in and opt out via self-service. So now we need some smart groups. We create 4 smart groups, 1 for each testing level, and then a 4th for those who have not opted in. So for the testing gamma group, here's what the criterion looked like. Testing level like gamma. For computers which are not part of our testing group, it's testing level like blank. Now, when we scope policies, we initially target our alpha testers, which is just my machines. And when I'm convinced the policy's working, then we target the beta group, which is just my teammates. And then when the team is convinced that the policy is working as expected, we will then add the gamma group, and then our testers have 3 to 5 business days to test the policy and provide us feedback before we make it available to the general workforce. Now, alternately, since we have a smart group of none, we could just exclude policies from the testing none group.
So, yeah, if that discussion, or if that example sounded interesting, I highly recommend checking it out. Having a opt-in beta program is cool, but the framework behind it kind of more fundamentally helps your end users feel more connected to your IT team, and that is really great. I think a lot of IT groups kind of struggle sometimes with connecting with their users, and the API leveraging there is awesome. I wish we had more time to talk about it, but check it out as homework. For our next example, we're going to look at keeping track of your computer's Adobe Flash update state setting. We've got, you've probably seen, oh, that looks nice. You've probably seen this pop up before. We've got our 3 options: allow automatic installs, notify me, or never. I got my phone working, but I didn't catch up. I'm going to come over here. So looking at our extension attribute, we can kind of see the name is Adobe Flash Update State, the data type is string, the input type is script. And then we can kind of look at the script a little bit here. This one, unlike Laurent's, is short enough that it fits in a slide. And if you can't read this, that's okay. The kind of basic rundown is, first we're checking to see if the plugin exists. If it does, we're then basically looking at a configuration file and grabbing 2 values from that, putting that together, and then we'll end up returning either never, notify, or allow as the value in your extension attribute.
So this is one approach for controlling when extension attribute scripts run, and was inspired by Brad Schmidt, who I met at a CCE class. And I highly recommend, if you can afford it, getting a training pass and attending the classes. CCE was by far my favorite. So by default, extension attribute scripts run at each and every recon, and some can be time consuming. For example, we have an EA for model name, which curls an Apple website with the computer serial number and returns the marketing model name. How many times do you need to run that extension attribute? Once? Maybe twice a year? Certainly not every time. So as one of the first steps of the extension attribute script, you pass the name of the extension attribute and the desired frequency in days to a client-side function. A client-side plist stores the name and the epoch in the result. Now, during subsequent inventory updates, if the current epoch is less than a given frequency, it reads the previous result from the plist instead of executing the entire extension attribute script. We have seen some improvements greater than 180 times with this. Now, this approach is fairly involved, and so I'd encourage you to look at Discussion ID 23915 for the details.
That's it. That's all of our prepared content. Thank you. We're gonna, can we get back to the slides? We've got, so we're gonna take question and answer time. Again, probably familiar, a couple mics up here. But we're also going to leave up this. So this QR code will direct you to a Jamf Nation discussion post that Dan's created that we're gonna use as our repository for any of the reference info that we've used today. These keynote notes will be there. Things like Laurent's GitHub, that kind of stuff. That'll all be there if you have questions today, we don't have time for them. Also use that as a forum, as a launch pad. Like Dan and I will watch that. And if you couldn't get a question in today, you got to run whatever. We can keep talking about this as in the coming days. We're pretty jazzed about this, so we're happy to keep helping you if you keep having questions.
Yeah, and if you're like me, it's not until you get back to your shop and you're working on something and then you've got a question. So if you were going to only write down one discussion ID, it would be 25815. Okay, so we're ready for questions then.
Yeah. Okay, somebody had to. Thank you.
You're welcome. Hey, Dan, first, thanks for all your work on the Jamf Pro beta.
Yeah, I forgot.
All of us really appreciate the work that you've done on that. Congratulations.
My
I
pleasure.
hope the swag was good. How often do you specifically, because you're still outside of Jamf, go back and reevaluate your scripts and EAs to make sure that they're still good, that you're still getting good data back from them, and there aren't updated ways or better ways of doing the same queries?
So if I'm actively using a script, I will go back and update Jamf Nation. So internally, we have a Bitbucket server where I sync everything up. But I tend to be kind of a one-man band at the church, and so I don't rev them as much as I should. Does that answer your question?
Hey there. In version 9, creating an extension attribute from a template, there were a lot of outdated EAs in there. For version 10, have that been cleaned up? Or
That's a Timothy
Is it still
question.
kind of the same sort of thing?
I was going to say that's a question for somebody above my pay grade. No, we don't know. I guess for sure we did truthfully notice some of that ourselves in our research of just like pulling up good screenshots and stuff. It's not that what's there is bad by any means, but some of it is, you know, maybe referencing an old version or something, or like you said, you know, kind of outdated in one way or another. I'm sure we're actively working on those to keep them fresh, because the last thing we want to do is say, check out these great templates.
Sure.
You know, 150 of the 190 actually suck. Like, that's not what we want to do, so.
Okay.
We are working on it.
Got it.
I don't have a more definitive answer, but we are working on it.
No problem. Thank you.
Yeah.
So the discussion ID does include a link to extension attributes on Jamf Nation, which I think
Yeah.
are updated.
Yeah, did
More
we mention
frequently.
that more
It's-
explicitly?
It's on, I think it's on that discussion ID.
Okay.
Okay, well, if there's no other questions, we can end a little bit early. Thanks for coming to our how-to sessions today. Thanks, Timothy and Dan, for presenting.